TMNT, the original comic, was published in 1984, created by Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman. I got them in these Ultimate collections, which I have done a video on the channel. I'll leave a link somewhere. But these very much influence all other incarnations of the Turtles. This is the blueprint for everything, really, because it's quite astounding, I think, that now nearly 40 years after the first published Turtles comics, we are still getting Turtles in a variety of different incarnations, from, you know, audiobooks to films to computer games, cartoons. It's endless, it really is. And it's mad how all of them really put their own stamp. They change the mythos, they change the character developments, sometimes for the better, sometimes not, but ultimately they're constantly shifting and constantly adapting to modern times, to different readers, to different markets, all that type of thing. TMNT is still being published now, and it's basically the longest running Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic ever, really, and it's still coming out, and we're on volume 15 of these collections, really. I'm only going to be talking about volumes 1 to 13 because that's all I've read. I have read them through twice now though, so hopefully I've got some thoughts on the subject. But either way, does this improve on previous iterations, or does it fall short of its predecessors? Most importantly, should you read it? Writing duties fell to many, many, many people, with senior scriptwriters, coordinators being Kevin Eastman, Tom Waltz, Bobby Curnow, and then Sophie Campbell coming in later as she took over from issue 101. I only have volumes 1 to 13 of these TMNT collections in the hardback. They do come in paperback as well, and that pretty much takes us up to 100 of the main series. I say the main series because the series was backed up by an absolute mass of micro-series, mini-series, one-shots. It's endless, honestly. It really is, the amount of different comic book titles that work its way in to this run of comics. TMNT Ghostbusters crossover, Secret History of the Foot Clan, Bebop and Rocksteady Destroy Everything, Turtles in Time, and many, many, many more. Art-wise, I'll tell you right off the bat, because the series runs over so many issues and because there's so many different mini-series, the amount of art styles and artists on show is crazy. I mean, just the artist on the main TMNT series, so the numbered series starting from 1 to 100, which is what we're talking about today, but it is up to 142 now, I think. So the main series artist was Kevin Eastman, Dan Duncan, Andy Kuhn, Ben Bates, Mateus Santoloco, Sophie Campbell, Corey Smith, Ken Garin, Michael Dinaleas, Dave Watcher, Damian Curcio, Chris Johnson, Bram Revel, and probably more. The colorist was pretty consistent really throughout, really, which is a good thing. But keep in mind, that was just the main series artists. The mini-series, macro-series, one-shots, all those have their own separate artists. Some of which those artists jump on as well, but it is a lot of art going on. So it goes without saying that though the narrative is one long-form story told in many publications, the art style and writing styles are vastly different, with each creative team coming in to tell their story. This makes the job of people like Tom Waltz, which is very much an unsung hero, I think, of this whole series, but his job of coordinating what's going on, all these different parts, making sure they work together to tell an overall narrative in as cohesive a way as humanly possible. That is a challenge, to say the least, I think. With the main series being split over so many different publications, IDW saw fit, really, to bring out these collections. I wouldn't recommend reading the main series on its own without the mini-series, because the mini-series has loads of pivotal plot points that are not featured in the main series. And so it's an all-or-nothing type series, I think. You really do need to just commit to reading everything within the collection to get that overall narrative and all the little in-between stories that connect to the overall story, or you don't. The story, while familiar, alters origin stories significantly. Volume 1 begins with a face-off with 3 of our mutant turtles and Splinter on one side and a mutated cat, Old Hob, on the other. Raphael is missing and Hob is trying to exact revenge on Splinter for scarring him. All the mutants come from the Baxter Stockman labs initially. The Turtles and Hob were mutated by a botched Foot Clan robbery that ends with a shattered sample of ooze covering the Turtles and Splinter and Old Hob, and then the ooze itself, it actually comes from an alternative dimension given to Baxter Stockman by Krang, the military leader of the Utrom people. Many familiar elements from the get-go, but it really doesn't matter if you're familiar or not, as it is all pretty much fully accessible to new readers. The whole series, in fact, rewards loyal fans with many plot or character nods from previous iterations and Easter eggs, but in general, you could have no knowledge at all and you would pretty much be fine. When mutated initially, Raphael is separated from the crew, and this is a perfect example of how they've tweaked those kind of story beats to match familiar personalities and stuff like that. Raphael is a perfect example because Raphael has always been that turtle with a chip on his shoulder with an attitude problem, and in this they kind of give a reason for that. When they're initially mutated, Hob steals away Raphael and then drops him, and basically Raphael is off in the city, just mutated, totally unknown what the hell's going on. So the other three have got each other and Splinter, but Raphael is on his own. So when they eventually reunite, because the first couple of story arcs are kind of dominated by the hunt for Raphael, really. But when they do reunite, you really understand why Raphael is very kind of antisocial, very withdrawn, very much a loner with an attitude, because they give a reason. So yeah, this approach of wanting to kind of retain familiar personalities but give them a more grounded, meaningful reason for existing is an approach that's used pretty much right across the main cast of characters. April O'Neil in this version is a scientist working at the Stockman Labs, so whatever kind of physicality the character lacks, she makes up for it in pure kind of brain power, because her intelligence and her fast thinking and thinking on her feet in this series is really good. Casey Jones is an honest, hard-working, rising hockey star that comes into contact with Raphael before Raphael actually gets back to his family. So again, like the old comics where Casey first meets Raphael and they hit it off, this has that, but again, it's changed. And Casey is very much this kind of hard-working, rising hockey star, but he has got a manipulative, abusive father, and his story arc between him and his father is actually one of the best in the early volumes. I was actually kind of a bit taken aback by how good Casey Jones's new origin story and his family life and everything was. When the Turtles are eventually reunited with Splinter, he explains that they are not just mutants though. They are in fact reincarnations of their past selves. Splinter was Hamato Yoshi, a member of the Foot Clan in feudal Japan, the father of 4 sons who were murdered by another Foot Clan member, Oroku Saki, the Shredder. Now reincarnated and mutated, the family have a second chance at life, but the Shredder is alive too. Shredder isn't reincarnated like the Turtles and Splinter. He basically is brought back to life by this immortal witch called Kitsune, and Shredder basically wants to take over the world, starting with New York, but also having the bonus of exacting revenge on Splinter and his sons and making sure that they die properly this time and have no second chance of life. And Splinter, now feeling persecuted across time and space, decides that he needs to kind of do something and exact revenge against his nemesis. This reincarnation plot creates a far more deep-rooted personal story between the Foot Clan and the Turtles. The 13 volumes that I read, they can broadly be split into 2 parts, I would say. That's kind of simplifying it, but bear with me. Volumes 1 to 6 tell the origins, it introduces the new and old characters and focuses on the Krang, leader of an almost extinct race from Dimension X, who is now trying to take over our world and make it the new Utrom Empire. Shredder and the Foot replace organised crime groups in New York and fight all comers for their own world domination plans. And caught in the middle, defending themselves, New York City and the world, are Splinter and the Turtles. As Volume 6 ends, there's a massive shift in status quo, and so the Foot Clan, Splinter and the Turtles, the Krang and the Utrom Empire are all kind of different after that. They're all shot off in different directions. That new path then dominates volumes 17 to 13. And this second arc brings more enemies in the form of the EPF, the Earth Protection Force, Madam Null, but it also brings many friends too, and it introduces the Turtles Universe, which is a series that would run for about 25 issues. Those issues then get mixed in with the whole, so now you've got the main series, the TMNT Universe series, and then one-shots and mini-series creeping in all over the place as well. So it gets pretty confusing in terms of the issues and the creators. And this is probably my biggest criticism that I have about the series overall. The fact that it consistently begins new storylines and brings in new characters while leaving already long storylines to continue and leaving established characters strangely behind. Characters like April and Casey Jones, for example, in later volumes, they're all but forgotten, really, apart from a bit of a late resurgence. But they kind of put to the one side, and their storylines in the first couple of volumes were some of the best and some of the most interesting. But then the series decides to focus on new characters and new storylines rather than revisiting them to see what they're doing now. It kind of almost says, oh, we're done with them for the moment, we'll come back later, we got all these other stories to tell. And that felt a bit like a wasted opportunity to me. Volume 7 to 13, the cast and the different comic books that are being collected in the series swelled to such enormous proportions, really, that it was just a huge cast and so many digressions from the stories that pretty much I wanted to read, really. The moments and epic events of this series are amazing. The characters get you feeling for them, the turtles in particular. When they're threatened or presumed dead, you feel it. You flip that page really quickly to make sure that everything is okay. And it's funny, action-packed with interesting twists on old favourites and an army of new characters that are well thought out for the most part and engaging. It genuinely has some of the best storylines, and when it ramps up the stakes and the action, it truly is amazing. That said, I think fundamentally I wanted to find out more about the Turtles and Splinter's story. I wanted to find out about the reincarnations. I wanted to find out about their past and their future, where they go in, how they feel, how they change. But whenever their storyline gets interested, it always then jumps to something else. You may think that just reading the main series would solve that problem, and you may be right in saying that, but trust me, there are so many pivotal plot points that happen in those mini-series and one-shots that it's impossible. They don't get recapped anywhere in the main series as far as I can tell, and so if you don't read them, you will 100% be missing out. And that's the problem in a way, because when you read them, you can't automatically guess what ones are going to be pertinent to the plot lines that you are following, you know, with bated breath. And so you just are all in or nothing, and that can be a bit annoying. When we reach volume 13 and the culmination of 100 issues and many mini-series, we are given another major shift in status quo. An ending for some characters, but a beginning for others, but not really an ending. It's the nature of the modern ongoing comics beast, to be fair, and perhaps it's not a fair criticism to level against this book, the fact that it doesn't necessarily end, because that's what it's there to do. It's there to never end, really, definitively. And I was fully on board for all 13 kind of chunky volumes. Great writing and great art for the most part helped me along. But by volume 13, the cast of characters had been through so much and had had so many enormous battles. I'm kind of happy leaving the series at this change of status quo, because I have the feeling that if I stay on board for another 5 or 6 volumes and there's another change of status quo, that I am just going to be annoyed and that it's just going to irritate me. So I'm kind of just cutting my losses in a way. I think volume 13 ends in a way that you can walk away, but ultimately, you know, you could probably walk away from it on volume 4 and have still just the same amount of lingering questions and plot threads as you would on 13. So should you read it, I would take it one step at a time. I wouldn't recommend buying all like 13 or 15 volumes of this series and starting from start to end and hitting it hard. I would take it one step at a time. I originally bought volumes 1 and 2 together, read them and enjoyed it, and then bought 3. Then again, just progressed slowly but surely. And so now I've read volumes 1 to 12 twice and 13 once. And I'm happy that I think I approached it in the right way, that I kept buying in little chunks and enjoying those beats of the story. But again, I kept buying to find, because I don't know, I think in some way I did think that it would end when, because Tom Waltz, one of the creators, kind of left the series on issue 100. I say left the series, he's still writing now, but he's not the senior writer, coordinator, whatever they call it, Sophie Campbell is. And I thought that it would be more of a definitive ending when that creative team kind of shifted, but it wasn't really. Like I say, you'd have as many lingering questions and plot lines if you left on any random volume as you would 13. It's just obviously you get to experience more of the climactic kind of action of certain plot points, really. So yeah, just take your time. Buy 1 or 2 volumes, see if you like it, and if you do, buy another one and keep going. And as soon as it starts to get frustrating or boring, stop, because again, there's not really gonna be a place that you can stop definitively. Maybe, unless Turtles, the series overall finishes, way down the line. But as it's still selling well and as it's so popular, probably due to get more popular with the movie coming out and all that, I can't imagine it's going to end anytime soon. And I can't imagine much of the plot threads that are introduced are going to end definitively in a way that we could call an end. But either way, that's my thoughts. I hope you've enjoyed listening to me waffle on for way too long about the Turtles. But thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.